Hello and welcome to a fistful of movies this week. The movies we will be fisting this week, how's that for a tagline, folks, is Kramer versus Kramer as our classic movie later on. But right now, I will be having a look at The Nightingale, which is released here in the UK next week. It is directed by Jennifer Kent, who directed The Bada Book, a movie I didn't care for at all. It stars Aisling Francoisi. I don't know if I have pronounced that correctly. That's what happens when you have a half Irish, half Italian actress. His name pronounced by an ignorant Irishman. Their name will be butchered. Isn't multiculturalism terrible, folks? Oh, how I long for the days when you read out an Irish actor's name and it would end in O'Shea or O'Flaherty or Fassbender. The Nightingale also stars Sam Claflin, Bay Cali Ganabar, and Damon Herriman. The film is set in 1825 in a British penal colony in Van Diemen's Land, which would be modern day Tasmania. And I don't know about you guys, but for me as an Irishman, and probably for a lot of people, I don't think there is any better villain on screen than the British Empire. They're so fun to get angry about and despise on screen. Historical Britain is my favourite antagonist, should I say. It's great to hate, and you know, you get a rush when you get wound up over things sometimes. Just look at Twitter. It's probably addictive to some, but I love to boo hiss these British pricks on screen. Now listen, I say that as somebody who has lived in England for 11 years. I like English people a lot, have many good English friends, and I don't believe in this almost Adam and Eve original sin that you have to feel guilty for being identified as a member of a lineage. I don't go to Mongolia and lecture the poor Mongolians on their terrible history. That doesn't really have much to do with anyone currently, and I don't do the same now where I live with English people, nor should you, to be honest. But damn, in this movie is the English Empire detestable, and I eat that shit up in the environment of a film. It's almost cathartic to hate sometimes on screen in a way, and the film itself plays kind of like a Western. I would say it is a Western in many ways, in the way it unfolds, even though I guess it would technically predate the Wild West, wouldn't it? Not to mention it's in Tasmania, but I'm talking genre wise anyway. So something happens Claire, who is this Irish convict. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but she doesn't exactly have her freedom until this British soldier signs these papers. That's the gist of it anyway. She is kind of working out her sentence. I guess she is some kind of indentured servant. I'm not sure. I'm not a historian. But she lives with her husband and has a kid. But she is basically at the beck and call of this British commander, Hawkins, played by Sam Claflin, who is the ultimate bastard in this. And he plays his bastardness with almost a mask of fake charm that hides what kind of a controlling monster he is. A very good performance by him. So many brutal acts of violence occur in this film that turns this movie into a kind of revenge movie out of nowhere that sees Claire head into the wilderness with an Aboriginal tracker to get revenge on the British commander and his band of merry men. And I hear people say sometimes, you know, they use this and that issue as nothing more than a plot device. I mean, for instance, people use it with something like rape often. Oh, how they only use rape as a motivation for a character. To which I say, so what? How many times do we see a murder as motivation for a character? I mean, every fucking Liam Neeson movie. And do you know why it's used? Because it's a damn good motivation for revenge, isn't it? In a movie. And you know, if these things happen in a revenge movie, whether it be murder or rape or kidnapping, that's enough, isn't it? Even if it is a plot device, it's a good plot device, especially in a revenge genre. I mean, not everything needs to be explored or presented in a kind of public service way, or even handled with care to show clearly the effects and the ramifications of something on the wider society. I don't think a film has that responsibility to do that at all. I don't think so, personally, anyway. But anyway, what does happen that sets Claire on her quest is really brutal and harrowing, it has to be said, but great motivation for both the character and the audience to have an immediate bloodlust in our hearts, which is what you want in a revenge movie, isn't it? Now, I think Jennifer Kent, especially after this movie, is a wonderful director, but I can't help but feel that, and maybe it's unfair to say, but I don't know, let's call them art house directors. They kind of feel like they are above the genre they decide to set their movies in. Like, in the case of Badabook, I might be setting my movie in a schlocky genre of horror, but I think you will find my movie is saying more than that. Maybe I'm being harsh, but for me, Badabook, for all its praise, came across like an art house hide and seek. Does anybody remember that movie starring Robert De Niro? Now, in Kent's defense, she would probably say she is using the genre to explore the psychological mind states of her characters. In Badabook, it was to deal with a mother's trauma and repressed grief. And in this, the art house flourishes in this revenge genre, were my least favourite part of this movie. Thankfully, they don't happen too much, at least for a while. But at times, she does that kind of Lynn Ramsey thing, like just when you think the film gets to its most emotive, she manages to focus on the dullest aspect or angle to divert from the intensity of that scene in the interest of what I would say almost being embarrassed by the trashiness roots of that genre. Lots of people feel differently about Lynn Ramsey and Badabook as well, and that's fine, but it is my opinion. The Nightingale is shot in this lovely boxed ratio. I think it's 1:37:1. Is that how you say that? Fuck knows. I've never actually said it out loud, so that's probably not how you say it at all. But it was beautifully shot by Radik Ladzuk, and it's great to see a Tasmanian Western, and the movie has so much bite to it and hits so many notes of the genre that it had a lot of good built up moments to it, that when certain things happen, I wasn't as annoyed as I normally would be, although it is a shame and anticlimactic in a way, and goes back to my feeling with these directors sometimes, that these directors have in their head, but it's not just the revenge movie, whereas if they just had the conviction to, you know, make up a straight up revenge movie without having to, you know, quote, say something, they might have very well made a masterpiece and very well made one of the best revenge movies ever. So it is a shame that this film loses steam massively in a way. It builds and builds to something, and when it reaches the highest point of intensity, you're kind of left thinking, okay, we're going to go this way now. And while it might very well be an interesting kind of dinner room discussion viewpoint, cinematically, it's a real bomber, man. It really is. The other problem as well, besides some really ropey dialogue at times, It's funny actually. Some characters speak in Irish in this movie at times, and there was no subtitles in my copy, so I was forced to rely on every last bit of Irish I learned to try and figure out what the hell was going on. And I think I did all right. Actually, I didn't hear "I'm Will Catacomb Dullamockadee on Leheris." That's an inside Irish joke. Don't worry about it. But some of the English dialogue is ropey as hell, and the main actress Ashleen Francoisi. Again, apologies for butchering her name, but she isn't up to it at all, in my opinion. And the movie really suffers at times following her as a protagonist. She just doesn't have the presence, and I couldn't help thinking how much more the movie would have been improved by having somebody like Saoirse Ronan in that role, because I think on the British soldier team of bad guys, Sam Claflin and Damon Herriman, who is an amazing character actor, actually. Big fan of his. Showing up in Breaking Bad, Justified, Mindhunters, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, actually. I didn't even know he was Australian, by the way, but they are all top notch. But I think Ashleen and Bakeley, who plays this Aboriginal tracker, I don't think they are top quality actors. They're not the type of actors you need in this role. And although I did enjoy their character beats and their story together, and I always found there was such a beautiful cadence to Aborigines when they talk in English that just sounds so poetic to me, especially in movies like Charlie's Country, Ten Canoes, and The Tracker. I just love hearing their slang. I really do. I'm not going to do an Aboriginal impression. I'm not on my first show back anyway. Jesus Christ, that'll get me cancelled. And the pairing of Claire and Billy, I think the director does right by them as characters. It feels authentic. Like sometimes when you have one character in a movie that is oppressed like Claire, like they immediately recognize the oppression in another character or race, but Claire is pretty racist towards Billy initially too. It did bother me, but in a good way. And likewise, Billy is pretty racist towards white people as well. So I like that they didn't kind of sanitize the character versions of either of them, and it felt very right. I think complicated, flawed characters are a lot more interesting to invest in at times. Anyway, it's almost it's almost like an art house Green Book at times, actually, and I say that as somebody who loved Green Book, so I guess it's a compliment, not an insult. Although I have been using the word art house pretty negatively in the review up to this point, but I do mean it as a compliment in this. Some of the other authenticity of the time that Kent goes for, I think doesn't work. And sometimes you got to pick your moments. So while it might be historically accurate for British soldiers to rape and pillage all around them in Tasmania at the time, like a bunch of Vikings, but you got to remember, if you were working within the time frame and the pacing of 120 minutes in a movie, sometimes if you show too much of something with something that is very restricted by time, such as a movie, it can lose its effect, and it can come across as overkill or even a bit unintentionally goofy. So I would say for 3/4 of this movie, we get an absolute A plus, brutal revenge western that is just very thrilling. Then we get something entirely different that kind of ties into what I said about Babadook earlier, where the genre becomes a means to explore something else. It is good brain food to discuss in a way what happens when a character with bloodlust in a revenge movie setting psychologically feels very different than they thought they would at a certain point. And I do think Claire's motivations are backed up very well by the use of dream sequences to show us her state of mind and justify what she does in the same kind of sickening, almost horror movie way that Trey Edward Schultz managed to present dreams in his movie It Comes at Night. So I do give her credit for that. So It's not like I don't buy the character feeling how she eventually does, but I didn't like it all in how it is portrayed on screen and how it happens and how the film fumbles. So the kind of alternate resolution it's now looking for, I just remember thinking, Jesus Christ, it's not going. She's not going to sing, is she? Oh Jesus, she's going to sing this out. What a nice thematical bookend to where she was earlier in the movie. Not really though. It really isn't, because you pulled the rug under what we were most interested in seeing happening in favor of something. Although I guess it's interesting to discuss and a nice idea to an extent, is so much more unsatisfying and kind of leaves us in a very lackluster. Here's my cat, in case anyone's wondering what the fuck this tail is. What are you doing? Come here. So it leaves us. This is this Mark Fermode or Roger Fleabert? I can't remember. I've named my cats. But anyone listening to the podcast doesn't know what's going on, but I'm a crazy cat lady. But the film, it where the fuck was I? You fucking interrupted me now. I can't even remember what I was saying. Yeah, but anyway, although it's very interesting to discuss where the movie goes from a genre point of view and from a movie point of view, it's a very lackluster place the film ends with, which is a shame. But for the most part, this film gives me more than enough to recommend it, and I am very eager to see what Kent does next. And I do think it's a big step up from The Bada Book 2.
You know Jack Edrich over in accounting?
He committed suicide.
Yeah, hi. Ted Kramer. Listen, I got to get those photos from the retoucher by tomorrow morning, okay?
I'm leaving you.
Honey, please. I can't hear. What? Okay, you too. Thanks a lot. See you tomorrow.
You guys eat?
So our classic screen review now, this episode, is Kramer versus Kramer, which I always thought kind of sounded like a title from a boxing movie. Kramer versus Kramer. But once again, with this classic movie series, I go in as ignorant and as ill-informed as possible when I look at these old movies. The hook here is that I go in treating the movie just like any other movie you might discover on Netflix. So Kramer versus Kramer. I'll stop that now, folks, don't worry. It stars Dustin Hoffman and Meryl Streep, and it's directed by Robert Benton, and it's based on Avery Corman's novel. And it's funny, this movie from 1979, it deals with so many things very intelligently and with such care and I guess openness, and it explores it without it feeling like it was done by an ideologue. Things and issues that, although of course are important and interesting to delve into, in 2019 are kind of co-opted in the most unnuanced, idiotic, dishonest way. I'm talking about issues like gender roles, women's rights, parity of parents' rights, and many other things that kind of feel dirty to talk about as a film analyst in 2019, just because of how, I don't know, unsophisticated and tribalistic I see it normally presented by people in 2019. But this movie is a great showcase for so many of those things, mainly because we care about the characters, mainly because it's a very warm, genuine, heartfelt movie. And as with all good films, and I think the strength on how much we care about certain things in movies always depends on the strength of the characters and strength of the story. And although it's a very simple story, it's brilliantly acted, and I swear to God, I was invested in the stakes and the outcome of this movie in a very big way. And I think when that foundation is established in a movie, then all the other elements that are at work, you can start to maybe examine how you feel personally about those issues, both through the characters and maybe afterwards as issues extracted from the film from a philosophical standpoint. Maybe independently you can think about them even days later. But all that is kind of chatter and background to very fundamental human values such as connection, communication and values like that. So the kind of so the film kind of opens with a very young and vibrant looking, it has to be said, Dustin Hoffman, who is very wrapped up in his job, much to the neglect of his family. And you know, movies often depict the workaholic parent as a bad thing, but I often feel, you know, it's a much more noble endeavour than it's usually depicted in films. You know, in films it's almost kind of depicted as a sad state of affairs of where society is and where capitalism has drove us. But you know, I always saw a bit different. I always found it as one of the most noble things as somebody working damn hard to provide for their family and make sure they have the best life while on this kind of ruthless hamster wheel on what needs to be done and done to survive and compete out there, I suppose. Now, we can and we will discuss, as the film does very well, what that does to the relationship you have with those you are providing for and the neglect that can cause. And I feel it in movies, it's always actually a class thing at times, if you think about it. You get some parent working at McDonald's double shifts to provide for their family. It's usually depicted much more nobly than somebody who is essentially doing the same thing but making a fuckload more money while doing it, but still providing. It's always depicted in a negative light compared to the former, and don't really know why. And I think what it comes down to, and certainly is the case with Dustin Hoffman's character, Ted Kramer, is even when he is home, he is totally absorbed by his work life and what he is doing. It consumes him so much that he really is totally checked out to the needs of his wife, Joanna, played by Streep, and his son, Billy, played by Justin Henry. He is so mentally on autopilot with them and so wrapped up in himself. He doesn't even hear her when she says she is leaving him in the early moments in this film. And this is where everything changes for the whole family, as Joanna essentially walks out on Ted, which is fine. But what also happens is actually very, I guess in a way, it's a very significant thing to explore, I think. In what she essentially does is abandons her child. And I think it is pretty fair to say in many ways that she does that. I mean, she does write him postcards and sends him pictures. And I was thinking while watching, it's very hard to kind of get into the technosphere of the 1970s compared to now. Like, did you feel connected to somebody back then through letters and cards? Like, is that the equivalent of FaceTiming or Skyping somebody or Facebooking somebody today? Because it is kind of interesting to think, if she abandoned her child today, it wouldn't have felt or have been presented as the same kind of vanishing act, because she would basically be Skyping Billy from California the next day, wouldn't she? But in this, once she has left, it feels cold and like she has totally excommunicated is the word, herself from her son's life. But anyway, once she leaves, this is where the fun really begins, and we start to delve into a number of issues that were outlined earlier on. But you know, it's mainly just good, wholesome fun. It's like an Odd Couple buddy comedy movie. It's genius in a way, actually. The normal formula for these Odd Couple adventures is often that these characters, who under normal circumstances wouldn't meet or hang out, get stuck together, like meet on a road trip or get assigned to work together. Think something like planes, trains and automobiles or anything like that. But what is so genius and also heartbreaking about the formula in this movie is that the odd couple are a father and son who have known each other since the son has been born, basically, and they are total strangers. They have nothing in common, they don't relate to each other, and this only becomes apparent now that Joanna has left. So it's quite sad, really. But the circumstances on screen are as entertaining as it is sad. We get so many of the odd couple beats that we love. The comedy itself is filled by Dustin Hoffman and the tasks he has to carry out around the home that were normally left to his wife. So he is the guy who is a kind of king of his domain at work, and basically struggles to carry out basic tasks like making his son French toast in one disastrous scene. And this is where gender roles come into it as well, because Hoffman doesn't have a clue what to do around the house and has to essentially become the mother. And I personally do think, and let me be clear with what I'm saying here because it shouldn't be controversial to say this, but I do think women are better at that kind of nurturing, much better than men, I think. I mean, naturally, that's not to say that men can't do it, and a lot of it, as the film shows, is practice. But I think, I think women have a natural advantage in general. I mean, how could you not if your body has evolved over thousands of years to rear children in general? That's all I'm saying. Jesus, I remember growing up in my house, my dad worked weekdays and my mom worked weekends. And I used to absolutely dread my dad's cooking over the weekend. I used to get potatoes that looked like lumps of coal, and sometimes the meat he cooked, cooked in quotation marks, looked like it could still move off the plate. And I saved my sister's life on a number of occasions by telling her not to eat that, whatever he's put on the plate. And I know that the movie's point is men can do the traditional female role and vice versa. And they can, of course, I want to make that clear. But obviously, because Hoffman hasn't done it before, and my own opinion is that in general, men don't have a natural advantage to that sort of thing in general, whether that is due to patriarchal, how the fuck do you say it? The patriarchy, the structure of that, or biology. Take your pick what route you want to go down with that. But because he is shit at it, let me put my own articulate take on it, but because he is shit at it either way, whether it's because of biology or the patriarchy, it creates a great underdog story in many ways, and you want him to get it right, and you want him to succeed. And the evolution of his character in that role, and how his relationship with his son progresses, is absolutely beautiful. And the film as well manages to capture the raw emotional messiness of life along with its humanity and its comedy in the same way that almost modern mumblecore movies get right. Something like Your Sister's Sister, for instance, except this time we get to see that kind of dramedy unfold with a real prestige A-list cast. And it's fascinating to see the potential them type of movies can reach when you take out somebody limited like Mark Duplass and switch him with somebody like Hoffman, Hall of Famer acting wise, and somebody like Streep, of course, for somebody like Greta Gerwig. By the way, I love both Duplass and Gerwig, but come on, Streep and Hoffman are on all-time great lists acting wise. But when you have A-list actors like them, it just catapults the movie that doesn't necessarily feel cinematic into something that feels very cinematic because of cast alone. And of course, the fact that it was shot on film also helps. There are, of course, though, some very nice scenes that are used to show how the relationship between father and son has improved, that are entirely visual based, which I loved. Like just how we see their morning routine has improved, and the contentness of their morning together is just joyful is the word I would use. And the thing is, Hoffman's character, and Hoffman in general really, which adds to the story, it's not like he is a masculine archetype anyway. It's not like Arnold Schwarzenegger neglecting his kids. Hoffman's character feels like somebody with a bit of practice and opportunity already has the inbuilt personality traits that would enjoy the role of mother, if you want to put it that way. And I guess this would contradict everything I said about women's natural advantage earlier, but again, I was talking in general. But with this guy, Hoffman, or Ted Kramer in this movie, it feels like he has the attributes of a very caring man, but because his role was that of provider, never got the opportunity to nurture that side of himself. And that works really well as we see him exploring that unfamiliar territory in this movie. And Hoffman as well, always, to me, has such nervous energy as an actor as well. So when he does have to fulfill that role, that nervous energy is very endearing and is also very comedic. And the kid, Billy, in this as well, the actor deserves a lot of credit. He really gets it. He just feels so natural as a kid. It's for sure one of my favourite performances from a child actor, and I think he is acting. It's not like something like Kavangele Wallace or that girl from the Florida Project, which are some of my favourite child performances. But with them two, it felt more like brilliant directing rather than acting. Those directors felt like they captured a kid in their kind of natural environment and manipulated scenes around that. But the kid in Kramer versus Kramer feels like he is acting the character, like he knows he's playing a role, but is doing it so accurately. I mean, the whole scene with the ice cream that happens in this movie was improvised on the spot, apparently. I mean, that's talent, isn't it? Although he feels like he is acting, but he doesn't feel like he's trying to be fucking an 8-year-old Daniel Day-Lewis like that kid Jacob Tremblay or Dakota Fanning as a kid. He doesn't feel like a 45-year-old method actor trapped in a kid's body, is what I'm trying to say. So full credit to the kid. Well done, Billy, or Mr. West, whatever his name was earlier. Meryl Streep, as Streep always is A plus in her supporting role, and I like that her character isn't a Mother Teresa. It's a tricky predicament. I think nowadays you would have to go out of your way to make her as sympathetic as possible. Hoffman might be an alcoholic or a cheater or something. In this, her decision to leave her son is presented as it is, as it should be, an ugly decision. And what happens later, which I don't want to spoil, even though it was ruined in the IMDb description, it's ugly as hell and messy in that true to life way. I totally understand where the character is coming from, and her motivations are clear, even admirable and brave in many ways in the 1970s. But I'm glad there is no cheap tricks of sympathy for her, and to be honest, she is the antagonist in a way, and that doesn't mean she's a bad person. I don't think an antagonist has to be a bad person at all, and I don't think you need to show a story from as many perspectives as possible. It's fine just to show stories, you know, through one person's perspective over another. After all, it's their story. And listen, Streep is good enough as an actress to portray any range of emotion on her face and tell the whole story right there on her face. So we don't need no cheap tricks to show her in a better light. And I know Streep wanted to portray her character more sympathetically after reading the behind the scenes. And you know, the film is so warm and bitter at the same time that we just want everything to work out for that kid and for Ted and for Joanna anyway. And we feel for them all. It's just that, of course, we are going to feel more for Ted just because we spent more time with him, or at least I did. And while dancing around the spoilers, the film does explore some other gender role specific things as well later on in some scenes that are really edge of your seat, actually, in the most tamest way possible. And I don't think I've ever been as invested in an outcome as I have as what happens at the end of this movie. Would we get a 70s Hollywood downbeat ending, or would we get the feel-good ending we craved? To be honest, I would have been happy with either, and the movie puts you through the feelings of both endings anyway. So it does have its cake and eats it. I cried and I smiled, but in which order is my cat again? I won't tell you. fucking hell, I need to lock these cats out for the next show. Kramer versus Kramer, it is a classic though, in every sense of the word. It's kind of got that It's a Wonderful Life level of despair and joy and love and life all wrapped around its warm cinematic blanket. And you know what? Even though it's not set around Christmas, it's actually a movie that you could put on around that time of year. So yeah, Kramer versus Kramer. Check it out, guys. So that is the end of the show this week, and I will be back some more with some regular content on Fistful of Movies next week.